I think he passed away about 10 years ago, but there was a legendary guy who worked for Warner Brothers named Frank Casey. And he was sort of the Warner Brothers liaison that would take everybody around Chicago and do all the usual stuff. So when I came here in '84 for the first one, he took me to someone on AM Chicago I'd never heard of before, Oprah Winfrey. So I did a live spot with her, which is really cool. But then what I sort of unintentionally got involved with was the sort of Siskel and Ebert warfare that was going on in Chicago at the time. Like they were on the show together and it seemed sort of like they liked each other, but they had a really intense rivalry.
Those were dark years. Yeah.
They had a really intense rivalry about who was going to get things first, on the air first. So Siskel had me on a local, I can't remember the local station that he was on. So he thought he was going to trump Ebert by having me on live. But what Ebert found out that he was going to have me on live, so he actually had me come in and do a taped spot with him in front of the Chicago Theater. Remember when the Chicago Theater used to...
Oh yeah, it's still there.
Does it still show movies? It doesn't show movies anymore. So they were showing, that's where it was premiering at the Chicago Theater. So he did a thing with me. And then I went over to, I can't even remember what station it is. So I went over and Siskel was there and he was like cool. He's like, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? And he goes, did you talk to Roger yet? And I was like, yeah, I just came from there. And he's like, oh, okay, cool. So they like tried to move the live spot up in the news broadcast. And I don't know if you've ever been in a news station, but they have a bank of television sets on the wall where you can see the other channels that are on TV now. So you can basically glance up and see what the other networks are doing, right, in live time. So they were getting ready to go live, and I'm sitting there and putting on my little microphone, that clips on at the top, and I don't know how Ebert did it, but he managed to get on about a minute and a half to 2 minutes before Siskel did, and someone went like this, Gene, right before we got on, I go, Gene, look, and there's me and Ebert, and it was raining, so he's under an umbrella, and we're outside the Chicago Theater, and Siskel just turned crimson. He was just like, so, and then we're like, 3, 2, 1, go, and he had to be like, here was that guy, and he like had to pretend to be all happy, and he was just seething inside. Then he got beaten by like 90 seconds by his arch rival, and that just went on both times I was here. And Ebert always beat him by like about a minute and a half, and it drove him insane. It was like the Roadrunner in Wile E. Coyote, where it was always blowing up in his hand.
If you see the new Ebert documentary, Life Itself, there's actually a section there about that. I guess when they used to tape the show, Gene got used to, he could read Roger's diary his calendar upside down.
Uh-huh.
So if he saw that Roger was taking a trip to LA, he'd figure out what movie he was going to go to interview people for, and he'd book the interview first and get it in his paper first. So it was like a thing, and Roger used to get it. So Gene did win sometimes.
Yeah, I'm sure he won sometimes, otherwise it wouldn't be a fair fight, but it was, when I saw it was Roger 2, Gene nothing at the time, but it was just amazing to me that the rivalry was so intense on a daily basis every day. It was crazy for decades.
So is it, I thought I read somewhere that with Gremlins that you basically got the role because, I mean, literally, it was Spielberg saw your audition chemistry audition with Phoebe Cates, and there was something about that you said, that's the guy. Is that pretty much how it
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Although, I never actually spoken to Spielberg about why he cast me. And what's really interesting is that on September 30th, we're putting out the 30th anniversary Blu-ray. And in it, there's going to be 2 special features. One, a 17-minute piece on how the animatronics for the, because people would say, how'd those things work? So they're going to finally show you from start to finish how like the Gizmo dolls and the Gremlin dolls operated. So that's one thing. And then they have a half-hour documentary about the making of Gremlins. And Spielberg, who's never spoken publicly, at least on film about it, actually goes on a camera and talks about the casting. So I'm actually dying to see it because I've never heard him talk about why he cast me in the movie.
Right.
So I'm getting my copy actually a little early. That's one of the perks, since I'm getting it this week. So I'm dying to see what he says about it. Because So I've never heard him even talk about the movie. He likes to let Joe Dante kind of take most of the credit for that.
Yeah, I mean, you think at the time, especially when Spielberg was just sort of getting into producing, it's my understanding he was a lot more hands-on than he probably is with some of the things his name is attached to now. But in your experience, how hands-on was he with that first film, especially?
Well, he wasn't that hands-on with the production of it because he was, he was doing Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom at the time. So he was away in Sri Lanka and other far-flung locations most of the time. But at the front end of the pre-production of the movie, he shaped the script very much. He cast the two leads, myself and Phoebe, or he had casting approval over them. And what else did he do? Those were basically the script, but obviously he hired Joe Dante. So he hired the director and some of the crew, worked closely with Chris Columbus in the shaping of the script, because the script was very dark and violent when they first got it. I mean, like in the first version, my mom gets her head cut off and it rolls down the stairs and stuff like that. And Spielberg was like, yeah, that's not gonna happen. That's not gonna happen at all. And Gizmo actually, I think, died halfway through. And they were like, Spielberg was like, you should have Gizmo, because he just changes into a gremlin and goes away. He said, no, Gizmo's a good character, you should have him sort of be Billy's sidekick and be throughout the entire movie. And actually it was Spielberg's idea at the end, I had no idea until I saw the final cut, that Gizmo goes in the pink car and flies through and kills Stripe at the end. And when we shot it, I killed Stripe at the end by pulling the shade. And when I saw it, I was incensed. I was like, hey, I saved the day, and now you have the little thing save the day? How do you have that small fuzzy thing can't even walk save the day? They're like, you'll see. I was like, wow, man. So yeah, so I had no idea that Gizmo was going to pull the shade up until I saw the final cut of the movie.
How old were you when you shot that? You were still in your teens.
I was 19, yeah, when we shot it.
And you've got like this incredible triumvirate of Joe Dante as your director, Chris Columbus, and Spielberg as a producer, and I can't even imagine, like, that's just such a beautiful coming together of these creative minds. I mean, Dante is he's like such a film geek too, that he had to have been in heaven. But tell me about working with him, Dante, because he's still one of my favorites, actually.
Well, he's a very laid-back guy. He's much more of a technical director than an actor's director. Like, he would say to me and Phoebe, he's like, I don't really know that much about acting, so I'm just going to let you guys kind of do your own thing. Because he kind of has a little bit of a kind of squeaky voice, you know? So he'd be like, yeah, so, if you get out of line, I'll tell you that maybe you did a little bit too much, but otherwise, yeah, we'll just have a good time. So he really, unless I got really too large, then he would sort of say, like, bring it down. Or if he thought it didn't register, he would say, bring it up. But other than that, he was just a very cool, laid-back guy. Never panicked. Stuff broke all the time. He was like, well, it's gonna happen. Like, he's the antithesis of like the screamer director. You know, it's like, what's going on here? That's not him at all. He's like, yeah, well, it's very complicated stuff. It's gonna break. So take 5 hours off and hopefully it'll be fixed. And I was like, okay, cool.
I have to imagine that, like, it was something with that much early animatronic technology, things were breaking down all the time. It just seems like a no-brainer.
Well, it's funny, and you guys will see this when you buy the 30th anniversary Blu-ray, which is really worth it. It really is. They've got some cool features in it, and they found this 30-year-old VHS tape underneath Joe Dante's bed, in which they follow Hoyt Axton around, who played my dad in it. And he's just schmoozing with people, and so they remastered it now. It's pretty grainy, but it's pretty watchable, and it's called Hangin' with Hoyt on the set of Gremlins. I haven't seen it either. I'm dying to see it. But what was your question?
Oh, about
stuff breaking down.
Yeah.
Yeah, here's the thing. I didn't realize it at the time, and I imagine Chris Walas, who did the special effects, will talk about it. But when they hired when Joe Dante offered the job to Chris Walas, he said, so they'd worked on a couple of things before, and he was like, so you want to do the effects for Gremlins? And Chris was like, yeah, sure, sounds great. Now, Walas was only 28 at the time. I was 19, so, when you're 19, a 28-year-old seems like, wow, he's old, because he's like 9 months. What he hadn't told Joe at the time was he had no company, no staff, no studio, no nothing. He had nothing. So as soon as he said, yeah, sure, I'll do it, he ran home and like started hiring people and renting space out and doing spec designs. He had absolutely like no company. He was just sort of like, he's like one of you guys at home with a phone. That's all he had. So he had to make up most of the effects as he went along. So they would say, hey, is there any way that you could have like a, a flasher gremlin? Could you do that? He's like, oh yeah, sure. They would go home and freak out and go, how am I going to do a flasher gremlin? So he said it was the most stressful, nightmarish job of his entire life. He hated every second of it. It was a total nightmare. And of course, it made him. And he also, in his deal, he had 1% of the merchandising. So he made about $11 million on the movie in 1984 money. So it made him a wealthy guy. He never had to work again, although he did. But every time he thinks about it, he says he gets sick to his stomach with anxiety. Because it was basically about 1.5 years or 2 years of just total anxiety. Because they kept coming to him saying, can you do this? And he'd go, oh, sure, I can do that. And he'd go, how am I going to do that? And he did that for about 18 months. And he said he came close to having a nervous breakdown because of the stress and the pressure and everything. And Spielberg would be like, so we're going to do this next week, right? He'd be like, yeah, next week. And then have no idea how he's going to do it. So he was racing ahead with the technology. Like basically he just managed to do all the stuff that he did. And as you can see, 30 years later, it still holds up pretty well in terms of effects.
Panic is the mother of invention, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. But the stuff didn't really break down that much.
So there was also like more traditional puppetry happening at times, wasn't there? Or was it all more or less animatronic?
I mean, they would have, for stuff in the background, they'd have, like Muppets, they'd have people with their arm in it, and they'd be, going like this. But the stuff that was in the foreground, like the gizmos that I was dealing with, that was pretty much all sophisticated animatronic stuff. And I would say it probably broke maybe a quarter of the time, maybe 20% of the time. But most of the time it worked really well.
More recently, you made an appearance in the last Hatchet film, Hatchet 3. How did Adam and you connect? For that?
Well, that was pretty easy. I basically woke up and checked my email, and Adam Green sent me an email saying, "You want to do this movie down in New Orleans?" And I was like, click, 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 yes. And so that's basically how I got that movie. So it was just if you watch his show Holliston or know anything about Adam Green, Gremlins obsessed guy, obsessed with Gremlins. And I don't know if this was conditional, but one of the things that I did to sort of say thank you for hiring me on Hatchet 3 was I went over to his house and he stuck in his Gremlins Blu-ray, and I did special kind of secret commentary for him on the couch. And he would stop and he would go, "What about this?" And I'd go, "Oh, well, on that shot, wow, I got a story for you on that shot." There's all sorts of stuff that I can't really say on the commentary, stuff that wouldn't be, shall we say, correct to do. So yeah, because it was the early 80s and there was some chicanery going on and some, I was 19 and completely out of control, so yeah, there was some fun stuff going on behind the scenes that was not for public consumption. So I gave him sort of a private, him and Joe Lynch from the show, I gave them a private commentary on the couch.
That's awesome. And it probably wasn't your contract that you had to do that.
Probably, yeah.
I got to ask one last question about Gremlins. Was one of Joe Dante's favorite actors is Dick Miller, and he's in that film, in both films, both Gremlins films. Can you talk about, because I just had the pleasure of meeting him recently, and he's amazing, and he's great, and he has the best stories, and he's done some incredible things in his career. Talk about, you may probably weren't as aware of him when you worked with him as maybe you are now, but can you talk about him?
Well, I don't know if you guys saw it. There's a really cool documentary out called That Guy, Dick Miller, that looks at his entire career.
Must see.
It's a great documentary. So I talk about him a bit in that. But if you look at Dick's IMDb, it's pretty astounding. I mean, he's worked with everybody from John Wayne to Quentin Tarantino to Scorsese, De Niro. I mean, he's like a who's who of film. So, he's the thing about Dick is he's incredibly Dick. I mean, it's exactly, he's a guy, he's like a tough kind of, army guy from Brooklyn. So he's got kind of what I call retro swagger. You know, he's got like 40s, 50s swagger. And, you know, he was kind of, that's kind of him, Mr. Futterman. I mean, he's not xenophobic like Mr. Futterman is, and he doesn't hate foreign movies and foreign cars like Mr. Futterman does. But I mean, you know, he has that kind of tough, you know, sort of all-American, you know, don't tread on me kind of thing. And that's what he brought to it. And he was actually the first actor in Gremlins that I worked with. He and Phoebe and I did a scene where he's drunk, and we take him out of Dory's Tavern and put him in the Kentucky Harvester. Yeah. Kentucky Harvester. So we put him in the tractor or the bulldozer, and he drives home. So that was the first scene we shot. Most of you probably know movies are shot out of sequence, so we don't shoot them from beginning to end, except for My Fair Lady, which was shot in sequence. I don't know if you know that. Piece of film trivia there for you.
Yeah, no, he's the absolute genuine article. Okay, we got some time for some questions here. We got a mic. There's one right in front.
How you doing? I was a big fan of the first movie. The second one, I just want to get your take on it. Did you know when you read the script that this was going to be not so much killing the series, but this was just not going to be good?
I actually don't think the movie killed the series. I think the release date strategy that Warner Brothers employed is what killed the series more than anything else. They were originally going to do it May 3rd, which I now refer to as like the Iron Man date, right? So they were going to put it out sort of on the Iron Man date, opposite Mel Gibson, Goldie Hawn movie called Bird on a Wire. No one remembers that movie, right? So we would have slaughtered that movie. But instead, Warner Brothers got the highest ever cards. You know, when people say like, did you like the movie? We got like 96s, 97s. So they got really cocky. And they had this sort of friendly rivalry with Columbia, which was releasing Dick Tracy that summer. And Warren Beatty was ever the shrewd showman and marketer, and he was dating his co-star Madonna at the time, who was one of the biggest stars in the world. So the Warner Brothers people, I'm sure they'd like to take this back, said, hey, you know what, we got such great scores on the Gremlins 2, let's put it opposite Dick Tracy and kick their butt and see it, you know, and teach them a lesson or two. Except Madonna was the biggest star in the world, and that backfired on them big time. So they released it like June 18th, about 6-7 weeks deep into the summer thing where everybody had spent a lot of their summer money and opposite a whole bunch of other competitive films, and it got slaughtered. I don't think it really was the quality of it, because if you see like the New York Times Blu-ray review that came out 2 years ago, it was like I wrote it. It was glowing. And in fact, Joe Dante sent me an email with the link to it, and it just said 3 words at the top in the subject line. It said, "Vindicated at last."
A lot of people forget that the first film came out the same day that Ghostbusters came out.
Yeah.
And you came in second to it. So, but
That's
it
right.
still did really well because it actually didn't go down the second week; it went up.
Yeah, it was one of the few movies that went up
Never
the second
happens.
weekend.
Yeah.
Went up 14% the second weekend.
Yeah, just word of mouth, really.
Yeah.
And so yeah, you opened up against big movies before and basically triumphed in the end. But so yeah, Warner Brothers probably thought that.
Well, you see also now what studios do is, I mean, a lot has changed in the 24 years since that movie came out. You can tell I've had my coffee and I'm still like, yeah, a little jittery. Most studios now generally won't take their big movie and put it up against any other big movie. So you see that now where a movie will go like, this is coming out, oh, Warner Brothers blinks and moves this movie to the following weekend, because nobody wants to go head to head because it's just stupid.
Yeah.
And it's just bad for business. So they decided to go up against Dick Tracy, and they lost big time because the movie only came out and made $48 million, where the first one made $148 million. So
I personally prefer the second one, thanks.
It's better than Tracy.
I wanted to ask, what was it like working with Christopher Lee in Gremlins 2?
Good question.
Well, Christopher Lee is an amazing guy. First of all, he's incredibly tall. If you've
yeah.
never met him, he's something like 6'5", so he's a very tall guy. And he's acting is flawless. He's kind and gentle and sweet, and actually the fun thing about Gremlins 2 was it was his 200th movie. So we had a cake for him, saying happy 200, and we had a big little celebration, and he was incredibly gracious and actually seemed to get as misty as an Englishman can get. So he had sort of restrained, humble thing. Just an amazing experience working with a truly great performer like him.
Back in the back.
Again, another Gremlin 2 question. The joke about Leonard Maltin, over here.
Thank you.
Leonard Maltin getting killed in
Yeah.
Gremlins 2. I don't know. Do you know if Leonard Maltin did give the first Gremlins a bad review?
Oh yeah, he panned it, which is funny. But he panned it, and it was funny because he was very close friends with Joe Dante and Mike Fennell, the producer, and so they were like, "Wow, you're our buddy, and you pan our movie." He's like, "Hey man, I gotta, if I didn't like it, I can't say it." So it's like, okay, fair enough. So he was a good sport and volunteered to get murdered by the Gremlins in the second one. So he had his comeuppance for his bad review of the first one.
Anybody?
Anyone else? Go ahead and yell it out.
I'm a huge fan of the Waxwork series, and I was just really curious about your experience on those films.
The question was, a huge Waxwork fan and my experience on those films. Wow. I mean, first of all, Waxwork 2 is completely insane. I did it and I don't really understand it, but it was fun. And I showed up and learned my lines and tried not to bump into the furniture. So I loved it. It was a blur. We shot it over a 5-week period, and my part's pretty large in that film. So I would go to what they had an A unit and a B unit shooting sort of simultaneously. So when I was done with the A unit, I went to the B unit. And when I was done with the B unit, I went to the A unit. And we did it 6-day weeks for 5 weeks. And I really don't remember much of the shooting about it except like running. I remember running from one place to another, learning my lines, spitting it out, going and doing it. It was just, working with Alexander Goodenough was great. And working with Bruce Campbell, of course, was great. So yeah, that was cool. And then the first one was a little less crazy, but it was still pretty nuts. Because the director was a good friend of mine, Anthony Hickox. He's pretty nuts. I mean, he's a real horror fan, and he's a wild guy. He's a wild Englishman. And yeah, so I mean, I think probably working with the individual actors was a great experience. Patrick McNee was great. Dana Ashbrook was great. Deborah Foreman was great. Love Michelle Johnson, beautiful woman. So all of those, both of those movies were very fun, very silly, good times. I'm surprised that people still watch them and love them as much as they do 25 years later, just because, not because of the quality reasons, but because they were very sort of small, under the radar movies. And they've managed to have kind of impressive staying power for smaller, low budget movies. You're talking 20 years later.
Anyone else? We have time for a couple more, I think.
Don't be shy.
There you go.
All the way over there.
Yell it out.
Why do you keep your boyish good looks?
The question was, why aren't I hideous yet? It's just, I can't take any credit for it. It's my mom and my dad come from good Irish-German stock, and I guess I really don't know what it is. I drink a lot of water, stay out of the sun, like Gizmo. I stay out of the bright light. And don't smoke cigarettes. That's pretty bad too. Yeah, I don't know. Just fortunate. I think I'm very lucky because I have good hairlines all through my family. So if you manage to keep your hair and stay reasonably thin, you can stay youthful looking indefinitely. Hopefully.
Use the same face.
I also plan on doing something that no human's ever done. I plan on actually never dying. I've looked into death and I'm really opposed to it. So I'm gonna try it and live for a really, really long time because I have a lot of fun being alive. And I would imagine everyone else in the room does too.
They're not as committed to it.
I used to work in a video store, and around Christmas time I used to put Gremlins in all the time, and my manager would always give me crap because she thought it wasn't a Christmas movie. Would you think it would be?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Came out June 8th, so it was a summer movie, and I was like, why are you putting, I mean, I didn't really understand the thing, and Joe Dante would go, well, you kind of want to see a Christmas movie in June because it's hot, it's muggy, you know, you feel like you miss Christmas in June. You don't miss Christmas in Christmas because it's Christmas. And I was like, oh, that's kind of, I like that logic. So, and also, you know, we kind of bag on Christmas a little bit, you know, in the Phoebe Cates Santa stuck in the chimney monologue, which of course is a whole nother panel. But yeah, what's happened over the last, I would say, 8 to 10 years from my vantage point, is that it's really become, I've had people come up to me and say, they come up and say, we watch Gremlins every Christmas, come in, we sit down with the folks and we just watch it every Christmas Eve. I'm like, really? Everyone? They're like, everyone, get the whole family over and sit down and watch it. And I go, well, that's cool. So it's kind of morphed into like a Christmas tradition for a lot of families, which I think is great because it's kind of turns it into a movie that will never die. Kind of like Wizard of Oz, you know, it becomes one of those films that just you show over and over again because it's linked to a holiday, like Die Hard.
I watch Gremlins and Die Hard every Christmas.
Well, the Music Box Theater here every Christmas now, they do the double bill of Die Hard and Gremlins.
Do they?
Yeah, it's a lot of rep houses.
Come to Chicago for that. That's
yeah,
cool.
Absolutely. That's a great idea.
Get up there and just intro it.
Yes, I think we're out of time. Zach, thank you so much for
Thanks,
coming
guys.
and talking to us. And he's in the dealer room today as well.